You got the heart, but you ain't got the tools no more. Now forget it.
Hey everybody, welcome to the lightning round of the DasGrain. This time I'm going to show you guys the ACES workflow. There's really not a big difference on the ACES workflow versus the regular Nuke color science. It's just what you choose in this little ISO color space. So I went back and forth. I wanted to do a quick demo, if you could call it quick. It would probably be hopefully around a half hour, in regards to showing you guys the degrain process and the regrain process with the best explanation possible. So again, special thanks to Fabian for a lot of back and forth, you know, just workflow, and this will definitely help you guys kind of really get your head around this actual plugin, which is awesome. Again, check out Fabian's website, and definitely special thanks to him for all the help on this. So again, this is all downloadable for you guys off of my site, so you can go ahead and grab it. I'll also put in, just for the heck of it, a DasGrain Nuke, regular Nuke if you wish, so you guys can use that as well. Again, it's nothing much different than just changing this ISO color space, which I'm going to get into. So this is going to be like a lightning round version. First off, you're going to need DasGrain, free from Nukepedia, and then of course NeatVideo, aka reduce noise. NeatVideo website demo is free to download, as is DasGrain, but this demo is 720p max resolution, which can be an issue when trying to sample grain just for learning purposes, but it is there for you to download for free. 30 seconds is the maximum, I believe. Or you could buy it for $249. I'm not, you know, supported by NeatVideo or nothing, but it is definitely worth it, especially when you guys are degraining for creating your alpha mats. Again, it is the industry standard, as well as DasGrain looks like the industry standard for graining. We talked about this a little bit with Fabian. The reality is, as luminance increases, so does noise increase. Now, that is a reality, but perceptually that's not what we see. What we do see, due to the difference of the signal-to-noise ratio, is we end up seeing a lot of the noise in the blacks, and that seems to go away into the whites. But again, because of the signal-noise ratio, you just don't physically see it. But again, this is the reality, and that's why we have to have a linear increase of the grain, both in red, green, and blue channel as we kind of move through this. I always kind of mention that because it kind of throws people off. It's like, what do you mean I need more grain as luminance increases? It's like, yeah, that's just naturally how it is. So okay, so here's the first process, which is the degraining process, and this mostly is the NeatVideo plugin, which is obviously reduce noise. So you come in with your plate footage, and here again is my nephew, and as you can see, we do have some grain in here. I'll just use my arrow keys. So you can see this was shot with a Blackmagic Pocket 4K. We have a lot of chrominance noise in here. You can see a very colorful Skittles colors here. And I have this resolution at 1920 by 807 or 802. It's a really weird resolution, but we're only going to be able to do any work in this center area due to the demo version of this software. And again, this is for you to learn it. Do you like it? You know, it's just something to be aware of and to definitely practice. So I added this little thing here, check for negative numbers. You can also turn on zebras, as per what Fabian was talking about. He wants to make sure the footage doesn't have any negative values. Again, you can come in over here and sample and see that we don't really have any negative values. But if you wanted to, you could turn on your zebras up here, or you could also use the curve tool to just check it out. As you can see from this graph, the Alexa itself has negative values in its original wide gamut, and then when you convert that through a color transfer into ACES CG, which is the working space we're working under now, that it actually can incorporate negative numbers. And NeatVideo doesn't like negative numbers, either does DasGrain. If I hit S for settings, you can see the color space we're dealing with. OCIO ACES 1.0.3. ACES CG is our workspace. If you're working under Nuke workspace, obviously you'll be under Nuke, and then you'll have it set to linear. You'll be working under linear. This is ACES linear CG light space. So with that said, we can come over here to the curve tool, and this is commonly something, if you put the max luma pixels, you can go ahead and first off, you can do reset here to reset the size. It's going to look for every single pixel in the image, and we're going to go ahead and hit go, and I'll go ahead and let it scan through the entire sequence of the shot, which is my nephew looking behind him and looking back. and it's going to basically look for the darkest pixel and the brightest pixel. I'm pretty sure this tool looks for negative values as well. I could be wrong on that, but this is one way to see that this is showing the max and minimum lumen pixel per frame. And you can see here that, you know, we're looking at values of, you know, 0.003 and values of 2.3. And again, when it comes to Alexa cameras, you got to remember that it's not just the 0 to 1 space. It goes out as far as 15, 0 to 15. So just be aware of that. So whenever you're using Alexa cam footage, which is a big majority of what people film on besides the Red camera in the industry, be aware that it's important that to do a conversion where all of the degraining happens while it's in a different color space, while it's in its original camera color space. If you're dealing with cameras such as the problematic, not really problematic, but just the way that Alexa works. So that's where you have these reverses here. So what happens is, and this is what Fabian's going on here, is he's got reverses. He's basically converting the footage into something, basically getting the negative numbers out, and then bringing it back to where it's at. So these are inversions. So you can see if we take a look at this OCIO color space, it's in ACES CG and out whatever it is that you want to transfer to. So if we were dealing with something like Alexa footage, you would come over here and choose the output to ARRI, and you would choose ARRI linear Alexa wide gamut. Okay. Now obviously this is black magic footage, it's not going to matter, but you can see what that does with this connection here. It will, on the other end, reconvert it back before we write it out to coming in as ARRI and getting reconverted as ACES CG. So this is automatic. You don't have to touch this. Everything is changed up here. So I'll go ahead and put this to, and again, if you were dealing with just not working in ACES, this would actually be set to linear. Okay. So we'll go ahead and put this back to ACES CG. So basically there's just no conversion going on, and you can disable this. So if I go ahead and take this, in our case we're using Blackmagic, and if you still have negative numbers in your comp, when you come to this grade node here, okay, you might still have negative values. You might see it in your zebras. You can also add a lift to it to kind of get those out of there for the sake of this reduced noise. But we're going to disable these as well. And now we're going to get into the reduced noise. So I'm going to make a fresh reduced noise so we can go through this. And here it is. This is reduced noise version 5.1, I believe. So we're going to throw that on right there and put our viewer to it. So there are many tutorials on reduced noise. I definitely have a link at the bottom for NeatVideo. Watch all of their interesting different ways they workflow. They got a whole bunch of workflows. It's very important that you take the time as a professional artist to watch those videos. So we're going to do prepare noise profile. I'm going to click on that, and you get this nice little pull-up window here. And it's going to ask you, are you working with progressive and interlaced footage? This is a frame per frame per frame shot. It's progressive, so we'll hit that. And you have a couple profiles that you can set up here. I usually work in this 2x2 here. If you set this to normal, you're going to get normal, but this 2x2 is really good. Oops, let me go back here. There we go. And what you'll get is all these different conversions to take a look at and kind of examine for noise. You can basically scroll your wheel in to take a look. You can come in here, and if you put your scroll wheel right here, you can use your middle mouse scroll wheel to move through the shot. Now, it's depending on how we started into NeatVideo, it's only going to isolate to a couple frames nearby. You see that? I can't go any further. This is a longer shot, so if I come back out of this and choose a frame range that's possibly at the end of the shot like this and go prepare noise profile, you'll see now we're at the end of the shot, and now we can kind of go back and forth, and this might be a better area because we're going to get less, we're going to look for more homogeneous like areas of grain. So with that said, you can stick with a generic profile, but you definitely want to do auto profile. So the second you hit auto profile, it scans the image, okay, finds the largest chunk of homogeneous grain as it can, and there's not much there, and it shows you the grain level here. Okay, so it's already sort of begun the plotting And as you know, we're basically plotting how much grain is at every level, obviously between the range that is here. And this range can be very large. You could see that through the auto calculations, it went around and resampled different areas at best it could, and it came up with this right here. So if you come in here, you can see that there's certain areas where it didn't get plotted based on the size of these like circles are here, and based if it's yellow or not. But you might have to come in here and manually sample certain areas, okay, to repat this. But generically, or generally, you should see this kind of go up like this. It should go up like this completely, like from a linear progression, because grain's going to increase as luminance is going to increase. So this is your grain level, and this is your luminance level, okay. So again, it's a good start, but if you want, you can come in here and sample certain areas here. But again, the minute you move this, you're going to see the option come up here to do a manual fine tune. So I can come over here and physically grab this, and now again, now you can see. And again, if you change this square, you can see it can get, it changes it gets bigger. That means, yeah, this is really good. It's a nice big sample. But it says not uniform. It's going to give you a warning. It's a little artificial intelligence, you want to call it, to tell you it's not uniform. You bring it too small, it's going to be telling you it's too small because it's turning yellow, and ultimately, you know, it's going to be even smaller. So look for little warnings when you're resampling. So you can see I'm not getting a warning sign here. I'm not getting a warning sign here. But if I put it on his nose, you can see it says not uniform in the Y. So I can come over here, and if I want to, do some custom resampling here. So I can come over here and say manual fine tune. And as you move this around, you'll start to see the selections of the areas that we can sample. So if I go to the red area here, you can see how it turned to this area. This is the dark area. So it's going to resample just this specific luminance value for this in the red, for this in the green, and for this in the blue, whatever's selected. So again, if I come over here and I hit this little button here, Auto Fine Tune, you can see it updated a little bit on the red channel, okay? And you can go to different areas. Again, because this is lower resolution, the grain is, I can't get away with small windows with lower resolution, so it is a bit of a pain in the rear end. The computer, again, already plotted all this. And then you can see the quality at 77. I believe 70% is really what you want, 70 or higher. But you can see we can move this here, and then we can sample it again. So you can see now, I'll go ahead and sample this. You can see we were at this level right now, and it's resampling it. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this, but before we do anything else, and we can go ahead and hit apply, and we'll be able to see the adjustments. I'll hit apply really quick, and you'll see it's going to tell you the demo version only can render this, and you're going to get this watermark, which kind of sucks. But you can see the difference if I kind of zoom into the footage here. See the grain there? And that's the cleaned up version. Now we can go back to adjust filter settings, okay, and hit OK. This is going to adjust those settings. Make sure, of course, you're working under advanced mode, so you can get all the advanced tools. You can come in here and keep resampling, and then you can also hit this button, which is autocomplete. And autocomplete will basically kind of get this line basically averaged, so you get a nice average there. So let's go ahead and jump into the adjust and preview. And if you come in here and you just click once and hold on your left mouse button, you'll see the original grain. So you'll see this little option tell you, it says right here, filtered and original. You can also isolate an area like this and move it around, and if you double click, okay, if you yeah, you just get rid of that basically. So if you want to get just a local area, you can kind of lasso grab out from your left mouse button there. Now this is where we need to use these other windows here to investigate the grain level. We're not out of the ballpark yet. First off, we want to come over here and we are going to come to the temporal here. We're going to set all of these to high resolutions. Temporal will actually sample the other frames around it. You can see currently it's set to 2, so it's grabbing 2 frames of front and 2 frames below, and it's comparing those two as the grain sort of, you know, granularly moves through the scene, and it's trying to decipher detail versus grain. And that's how you're going to get a good result. Now we are in a very slow moving shot here. This is a lockdown shot, so we can actually be very crazy with this. We can put this all the way to 4. So now it's sampling 4 frames in front and 4 frames behind, as you can see. And then of course we've got temporal noise here. And in this case, if there is a lot of movement in the shot, we can put this to -25 right here if we need to. So I'm going to go to spatial. And this is where we're going to start cranking this up. So I'm going to take the luminance. We're going to take out all the grain of luminance and chrominance. This is going to be a heavy degrain, but we will show you how you can reintroduce grain. So now you start to see defined lines, but you see no granularity in the shot. You still have to investigate here, because you can see if I come over here and poke around, I'm going to look by clicking and declicking and see, and there is still maybe a little bit of noise. Let's go by the trees. Looks like it's holding up pretty well, but you want to investigate all 3 of these windows here, and if you see anything that looks like grain or something, you really want to come in here and do some fine tuning. Some of the things you can do to fine tune, which can actually create more problems than solutions, but it does help, is to come in here to the frequencies. Let's see, there's the artificial removal, and if you come to artificial removal, you can play with the high, bring it up as high as 50 or 60 for high and medium detail, and you'll start to, you can see it's starting to clean out some of this, but we've already got most of it, which is really good. So just make sure there's no grain anywhere in any one of these 3 windows here, which is what you want. So again, I will hit apply. Again, this is a very heavy degrain. You can see the difference here as we kind of look at the bottom. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that and come over here. And you can also, if you want to, if I go to adjust filter settings again, you can save out these settings and so forth. So you can save them here and load them up here as presets in case you have the same footage used over and over again. You want to just load it up, which is kind of nice. And you also have this play all and turn off preview. So play all will actually allow you to play through each, these shots. You can just look for any granularity, movement, and so forth. And see, right now as you can see, we just have details. We don't see grain. I'm sorry, we see lines and so forth. Okay. All right, so now that that's done, we're going to do a quality check just to make sure. And this uses the same kind of quality check that you guys saw on there. The first is minusing the grain plate to the degrain plate. And here you're going to see just the grain by itself. Now what I'm doing here with the exposure is something that basically this multiplier does. It just brings up the exposure. So this allows you to see a granularity. You don't want to see defined lines. You want to see just a granular, homogeneous, kind of like a blurred version of your regular plate, but with grain added to it. And that's looking pretty good. Again, we can go through these different passes here, which are very similar, and we can only look in this window, by the way. And we're looking for any type of noise and so forth, and we can see we don't see it. So that's good. So you don't want to see any grain here, but you do want to see grain on this one. Okay, so degrain helper, what's this all about? The degrain helper, again, watch the interview where Fabian talks about this. This number must equal the same value in your DasGrain. So this is the problem when paint artists will complain and say, hey, I need some luminance detail to do some cologne work, and it's a necessary reality. So what this does is it takes the original plate shot being fed in right here, and you can see that if I take this and take the luminance grain all the way back to 0, it brings back the luminance grain. If I compare this to the original plate, you can see that there's chrominance grain in the original plate, like a Skittles bite-sized candies, and here you got the nice luminance grain, which is nice. We don't want to have chrominance grain, but we still don't want to have grain. So this is a way of sort of measuring out a certain amount of grain that can be used for the folks that do the paint work, but we can take it away and add it to equally when we bring it in and offset that in the regrain. So again, most likely, according to Fabian, you're going to get about a 0.8. I'm going to do a 0.7 just so we can physically see it. But you can see we've brought back some detail for the paint department. And now we're ready to physically pre-render the actual plate itself. So it's important that this is pre-rendered because this stuff can really bog down, reduce noise. You don't want to have a heavy pipeline as to bog it down. So we're going to re-render this. In our case, for ACES alone, we have to click on Write ACES Compliant EXRs, and we're rendering it out as ACES CG because we're in ACES CG workspace. I'm going to go ahead and hit Render and hit OK. And then we'll just wait for this to finish. I do recommend that you guys watch the interview, watch the NeatVideo videos, watch Fabian's video that he has on Vimeo explaining this. I think this, even for me, sometimes it takes time for me to kind of get used to understand plugins of complexity, but I think all of these things will help you guys out and understand the beauty of why this program, or I'm sorry, this plugin is used more than ever, and it's the most accurate way of working. Basically, it takes the best of both worlds. It doesn't give you a synthetic grain. It actually clone stamps in a Voronoi pattern a portion of your normalized grain. And at the same time, your response curve is, how much grain varied from the luminance from 0 to 1 for red, green, and blue has been sampled. So there's really two things going on here when it comes to regrain. Regrain uses the comparison of the DasGrain plate and the original plate to look at the response curve, how much grain along the lines from 0 to 1, from 0 to 0.1 to 0.5 to 0.7 for red, green, and blue channels independently. And then there's this sort of clone stamp Voronoi fracture from a homogeneous version or a segment or sample of your original footage. Okay, so let's get into this. This is our degrained plate shot, as you can see here. And what you want to do is to start building your comp from there. So you have your degrained plate, and here we have some CG objects. We have skin tone of my nephew here. We have actual checkerboard with sampled colors from the plate shot, and then we have the drone itself that's in the shot. And right now we're going to stick with just CG being this kind of skin tone here. And here you can see you start building your comp. You have your grainless CG or grainless plate, and then your obviously no grain CG, and you merge those together. Now the beauty of using DasGrain is the fact that the degrain process happens at the very end here. So any light wraps, anything where you have blurred edges for your CG, you don't have to worry about any muted grain in these areas because it's all taken care of through DasGrain at the very end of the pipeline. So here you can see clean out RGB. And what I did was this I bring down to put into the input of the mask. DasGrain has many inputs. You have to have the plate shot, which is the original plate shot with the grain. You have to have the degrained shot, degrained plate, and then your comp. Your comp is basically your degrained backplate with your CG together. So a lot of inputs, yes, but there's a reason for that. Now we have a mask input which actually will allow for 3 different masks. The mask inputs to all the masks that come through the DasGrain have 3 different masks. We're going to be using the alpha, the green, and the red channel in this case. So I kind of have it over here where I want to bring over my CG alpha, which is right here. But I want to clean out the RGB input, so that's what I do here. So you can see basically if I go back to color input, I clean it out to black, as you can see here, and then I come over here, and this is optional if you want it, but you're degrain a mount mask if you want to have that. You can see this is set to output RGB, and this is inputting to the red channel, as you can see here for the shuffle. The green channel, we actually have a, if I kind of show you that, I basically shuffle this into the green channel, this roto mask, so that this area right here is the area that is covered, that will be the area that will be masked off, so to speak. We're actually going to invert this so that this is the area that will actually be calculated for the grain. So the analyzed grain will only calculate this area here, which we'll talk about in a minute. So if we kind of take a look at this mask, you can see I got R, G, B, A. So really it's the green and the alpha channel that I'm using as inputs to the DasGrain mask. Okay, so they're all in here, and you're not going to need all this, so to speak. We're going to get to this little area right here, this little quality checker. So let's talk about the DasGrain. So this is the newest version of DasGrain, if you guys, version 1.7.4, and it kind of talks about what's new in it and so forth. The help menu is where you want to start because it's going to take you through the process. It says, first off, step number 1, this should be the only regrain node in your comp. So I'm pretty sure he means like it's probably not a good idea. I do have a regrain node over here, or maybe it just means that there should be no other regraining. 2 is to connect the plate, degrain plate, and comp, which we did, which is right here. And then the next one is to set the luminance degrain amount. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to come over here to this DasGrain. And we're going to set the degrain amount to 0.7, okay? And we're also going to make sure that the mask of the degrain amount mask is set to the alpha input, okay? So it's not going to degrain anymore for the CG object alone. Remember, we had that compensation of adding a little bit of luminance grain back here. And then again, whatever this number is the same number that was over here in the degrain helper. So you want to remember that number because we're going to compensate that out when we do the regrain. We don't want to overgrain, so to speak. So that's how we can kind of bring that back. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and just poke around here. So after that, we're going to get into the Analyze button. So we're going to start progressively from left to right. Analyze, adjust, and replace. All right, so there's many different outputs. By default, you should always have this set to regrain comp because this is the regrain comp, so to speak. The color space, this is the same thing that we had before, input and eternal. So if I go over here, this reverse process of the OCIO that's in here, it's the same exact thing. So if, for say, you want to watch out that you don't have negative values, or if you have the Alexa footage to avoid any issues with negative values, you want to set your input here to ACES CG, and internal, you want to put this to obviously Alexa white gamut like I talked about before. So that's just like what we did over there. And again, he has this nice what's this about button here. Analyze, number of frames will be 20, sample count will be 10, and my analyze mask is the green channel, which I talked about right here. So I go ahead and take a look at it. There it is, right? The letter for G. But in this case, I hit the invert button so that this area inside will actually be the area that will be analyzed, okay? Or we're gonna be sampling the grain structures inside this area, okay? As opposed to this outside area, which didn't get degrained and has that dumb watermark. So again, we'll just kind of leave it be that way. And let's go ahead and analyze this. And we'll hit analyze. So again, you can add more frames. This is a very static shot, so there's not a lot of movement in the shot. Here we go. And if you did everything right, and you should come over to the adjust channel, grab the red, green, and blue channel and hit F. And what you should see is a progressive from bottom left to top right linear curve that goes up. If you get something that's like crazy wavy, then there was some issues there. This is just showing you the values of the luminance values from left to right. And this is the grain level top to bottom. Okay, so this is not actually giving us the structural grain. That's going to be done through sort of like a Cologne stamp process with Voronoi cells. This is basically telling us how much grain per channel, depending on the intensities. And it just went through the entire shot and basically tried to sample to see what, what's what, basically. So you can see there's a little bit of variance. Notice that we usually work between the values of 0 to 1 here, but it goes even further to values of 3. And again, if you're dealing with very hot bright spots that are like on Alexa footage, it could go as high as 15. So be aware that it's important that these lines always keep going up in linear fashion, as we talked about before. As luminance increases, grain will always increase. So we never want this to flatline or plateau. So at this point, we can kind of take a look at this, and we can start to kind of, if you want to, you can kind of start straightening out these curves. At 1, everything is so bright you're never going to see it. But then again, if you're dealing with HDR televisions and so forth, and you're reconforming whatever you want to keep things good. I think as compositors, we kind of beginning compositing, we kind of get into the just worrying about the 0 to 1 space, but we don't think about the spaces up here in case we want to bring the exposure down or something. So in this case, I could take the very last keys on the key here, which again I could go ahead and kind of straighten out, and I'm going to right click and say after linear. And I think I got another one right here, which I'm going to delete. This one I'll delete, and these guys I'll delete. And we can grab all 3, right click, after linear. So then we get a nice linear shape here. Again, the values we're going to physically see, at least on this sRGB monitor I'm looking through, will be from 0 to 1 that I'm going to visibly see here, unless I bring the exposure down. But bright spots and so forth, there will be, if you were to bring this exposure down through some color correction, you would expose the fact that the grains aren't matching in these areas above 1. So with that said, let's go ahead and start to poke around a little bit here. And again, you can kind of take a look at these curves. You could zoom into the 0 to 1 space a little bit here and just see the differences. Again, it should be pretty much straight, and you can delete some of these lines if you wish as you kind of move forward. That's fine. Okay, now we go on to the Replace tab. Okay, right now, let's go ahead and just do some analysis here. We'll go to the plate grain. So this was the plate grain of the shot. And if we bring up the exposure, you can see the original grain that it established in the shot, which should be pretty much these the entire area that was compared between the DasGrain and the regrain. Now, the next thing is the normalized grain. So this is actually, if we kind of take a look at it, kind of scrub through it here, you can see we got some we can scrub through it, and at certain points in time, we have some very nice homogeneous, whatever you want to say, portions that we can sample from, because it's in this box that we're going to take whatever's in this box and Cologne stamp it into Voronoi cells. So you can see there's maybe a better frame in here, like for instance frame 46. It's got a nice big section here that doesn't have a lot of features that seem unique. It's just very homogeneous. See that? But if I were to sample, say, a frame where he looks at the camera, you could see that his eyes have a lot of variation there and pattern, so to speak. You could actually make out the actual house, and this is basically the grain. Okay. And if we go to the adapted grain, this is the adapted grain itself with the CG itself. Okay, so this is just the grain with compensating the CG object added in and kind of overlaid on top. So remember, this is all overlaid on everything as we kind of look through it. It's important to also note that when you look at this, especially when you look at the exaggerated version, which is the grain QC, you can start to see the matchup happening. Now, with this version of the grain QC, you might see like a white line around here, but don't worry about that. We're seeing a very exaggerated, exposured up version for you to kind of like quality check. So you can go ahead and take a look. But you can start to see that the pattern is matching up pretty well on the intensities. But the problem is you can kind of see in the CG shape, it's using the entire grain, the normalized grain. If we go to the normalized grain right now, it's using this grain, which in this case you can see has a feature, which is the edge of my nephew's face, that's being calculated. We don't want that. We want to use a Cologne stamp process to take the area that's in this here and stamp it. So what I'm going to do is bring up my exposure here on my normalized grain. I want to find a nice chunk. Now, the minute I move this thing, okay, I'm currently it's sampled at frame 48. The minute I move this box, let go, it resamples to the frame I'm at and then the sample box. So again, if I change the frame range and move this, this will update. So I want to choose a frame that gives me a good chunk of, you know, featureless grain, and I want to get as much as I can out of that, like I said. So this is a nice big chunk. There is some little bit of defined line here. See that? That might be an issue. I might want to just grab, I don't know. I think that's good enough. I could grab this segment right here. The more the better, so to speak. And then I'm going to hit scatter. The minute I hit scatter, it's going to Voronoi. I'll go ahead and hit scatter. Now what's happened is it's taken that area and cloned it a million times. So you can almost see a pattern of cloners, you know, in here. And the bigger I make this, which if I turn this off, it's resampling this area here. You can see I could even move it around. You can start to see it, and you could even like leave this on and try to get it so that you don't get any features and so forth. Now, the clone stamping in the Voronoi structure can be seen by hitting overlay cell pattern. And here you can see with the amplitude and frequency, it's taking whatever was in that square in the normalized grain and sticking it in these little cubes or little Voronoi fractures. So in order to avoid seeing the seams between these, we can go ahead and turn this off and on. And if you see any seams, then you need to come in here and take this edge blend and increase it and decrease it. Depends on how big your grain is. If your grain's really big, you're going to see the edges. You can see as I do this, you can start to see the edge. But in this case, we don't even have to have this on. You know, it's only if the grain's really big that you got to use this blending. It's basically blurring the edge. And then you also have frequency to try to, if you don't want straight lines, you can break it up a little bit so that nobody sees the lines visible, so there's no pattern. Again, only if your grain's really big will you have this problem. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off, and we have a nice sampled grain here that looks good. So again, in case you don't want to worry about features, you can see this is what's going to be overlaid on everything, okay, with the information of what the response curve is. So here we've created the grain structure, and this is the response curve to the way that the values are put on the plate itself based on whatever values are in the plate shot itself, the details. Okay, so with that said, we can come over here and go to the adapted grain, and we can see visibly that this is looking pretty good. This was the skin tone that matched to my nephew. I could bring the brightness up. I can also take this to the brain QC, and you can see everything's looking good. Now the last thing that we want to do before we continue here is we have this replace mask option. So this is coming in through here through the alpha. Okay, so you can see, and if I go ahead and take a look at it, this is the alpha of the CG coming through. And what we want to do is make sure that we replace mask. And what that's going to do is, this is the original plate itself. So this is basically where we started, the original plate, and then we cookie cut out this area that's only the alpha of the actual grain itself. It's important to leave your original plate by itself without changes whatsoever. So we only want this area to have the CG on it. Okay, so it kind of like cuts it out. And again, so if you come over here to the analysis, you can see the degrain amount. I turned on that degrain amount mask. This is where we did the compensation. If we didn't actually adjust this, okay, you would start to see how that's purple and that's not matching. So we want to make sure that this is on and this number is on, so that you can see that it's not getting overcompensated in regards to getting grain or being too degrained, so to speak. So again, that's how we match up. That's how we allow our colorists or our paint department to actually have some luminous grain when they do their paint work. Everybody wins, so to speak. And this is all thanks to Fabian, of course, not me. This is all his doing. An absolutely amazing plugin. With that said, I believe that's everything that I could cover on here. we can go back, and if you find that in your normalized grain, you're like, you know what, I don't have a nice big section in this plate here. So you can see here's all this right here. You can actually come in here and grab from another external grain if you wish. So let's pretend that this shot, okay, was shot with a grain plate, which you can get those off of the NeatVideo website and film that on the day that you film your scene. And you can use that to capture the grain of what your camera's ISO and, you know, all that, as long as the debayering is the same. And the camera's the same, ISO is the same. You don't have that luxury all the time because of this, you know, having to get things done quickly. But it is there, and if you do have it, this is a great way to get even a bigger amount of detail. Okay, so if you don't have a nice big blank chunk like I did in the back of the head here, and everything was just a lot of like high frequency details, you could shoot another plate with stuff. But the difference with this is this DasGrain is currently set to normalized grain. So all we're doing is, once again, getting that normalized grain. In this case, this also was scattered. Okay. In this case, I could grab even a huger chunk there and turn this on. Now we got this nice, beautiful chunk. Okay, we got a bigger amount for this to work. So I'm going to come over here, pull out yet another mask, external grain, plug that in, and I'm going to come over here and make sure I don't double. You can actually find yourself doubling the scatter process, so make sure you turn that off and turn on use external grain. So it's using this grain here. You can see if I kind of like look at it. It's using this grain sampled onto here from this external output. And you can turn off scatter when you do this. And that is the same thing. Should work just as well. And I think we're good. So I'm going to set this to Grain QC so we can see this a little bit better. It's looking pretty good. Now let's just do some swap outs of our original CG. So I'll swap this out to this right here, and you can see I think I sampled a couple colors from there, and then I have my CG object, which I've added, which is a little bit too bright, obviously, but you can see the colors kind of going through the shot there. And then finally, one really cool thing I've added, just in case you guys want to use it, is this back blur test. This is where you can actually blur coming from the DasGrain plate. So what this does is, if you kind of take a look at it, it blurs in these little cubes, the plate shots, so you sample the original footage. This becomes your comp. And then we use the alpha mask of this, A for alpha, for the mask itself. So you can just swap this out really quick, like that. And then we can look at our DasGrain. And you can see, for the most part, with the exception of the area around the trees, it has to do with luminance values and probably adjusting the curve itself, that these areas are kind of like meh. Now by the skin, it looks pretty good. You guys see that? Kind of take a look at it from that standpoint. Now I can also come in here in the DasGrain and make a couple adjustments to the curve itself. So if I come to, say, maybe the green channel or something, and kind of poke around with that a little bit. Yeah, this is me just fiddling around here. So you can see the areas affecting are the original CG, so I can kind of make a couple adjustments to get that checkerboard pattern out. Okay, but you see how it's actually matching up pretty well down here. This is gotta remember, this Grain QC is a heavily, I would have to say, a heavily exaggerated version of what you're doing. And again, I can only really look in these squares, and generally it's not looking too bad, like around these areas. See that? And around his head where we sampled. Again, it also depends on where you sampled. But you can see how, you know, I could come in here and make adjustments. And you don't want to get too crazy with this, because this can get kind of, yeah, go through some of these here. Yeah, so you can kind of just fiddle around And again, this could even draw back as far as the results that I got from my DGrain. Might have been an issue there. But if I go to my final regrain comp, and you can see in general, if I go ahead and just kind of compare the noise itself. Here's a shot of my nephew out of focus. You can see the grain is matching up pretty well. And with that said, we can kind of swap this back to this here and take a look. And we could swap out the CG here and just just kind of take a look at the grain in general. And I could also come in here and take this color and sample this. So if I find this color right here, yeah, like this color right here was the matched up green, but I could come over here and just use my arrow keys. You could see the matchup of the grain itself. That's it, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this demonstration. Again, check out all the links of different video links. Special thanks again to Fabian for his amazing plugin. You can download this. Again, like I said, I have the ACES version. I also have the regular Nuke version for you to use and just copy paste into your comps, and hopefully it gives you a better explanation of this. I'm sure Fabian could have done a better job than I did here, but just kind of gives you an idea. So thanks, everybody.